Well, it's right at 12, and I want to make great use of our time here. I want to welcome you all to our virtual lunch and learn session today. This is a first for me since the pandemic, and I think a first for this network of women on campus here. I'm Clue Hansen. I'm the Director of Research Administration and the proud staff representative for the NCACE group here at Western. And I am going to be your humble host for today's panel. For those of you that are online and want to understand a little bit about what our network is, WCU, supported by our chancellor, proudly participates in the NCACE network, which is dedicated to supporting women and their allies in higher education, mainly through connection, through mentorship, and leadership development. And so today we're here to discuss this theme of legacy. This is the theme that our executive leadership through the NCACE has taken on this year. And I am interested in bringing together our panelists today to talk about legacy and where it actually begins. So to talk about how we turn early vision and lasting actions into legacy, we're going to focus this conversation today on two main aims. Aim one is we're going to have the conversation about what sets the groundwork for vision to form. How do we clarify it? How do we align it before it becomes legacy? And then our second aim, so the second half of our conversation today, will explore the transition from personal leadership intent to that broader organizational alignment and impact, which I feel directly precedes the legacy building. So before we kick off the questions, which we have some questions that we're going to spend about 30 minutes talking through with our panelists and then open it up to this great group of women on the line for their questions. I want to give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. So, Melissa, I'm going to start with you. If you would tell us your name, your title and position, and how long you've been at Western.
Thanks, Clue, and I really appreciate being here. Thank you so much for asking me. I couldn't be more thrilled to be with two of my favorite people as well on this panel. So it's all fantastic. So thank you for inviting us to do this. I'm Melissa Warga. I'm the Chief of Staff here at Western and the Chief External Affairs Officer, which I know for some of you, you may have no idea what that is, but I keep the chancellor between the ditches and I work with all the external affairs activities from marketing to government relations to economic development, anything that's not directly related to fundraising. I've actually just celebrated my 20th anniversary at Western on January 1st. I celebrated 20 years. It has been the most.
Congratulations. That's amazing. Wonderful.
Thank you. This has been just truly the best job I've ever had, and I love it every day. So thanks for having me.
Kim, let's bounce to you. Your name, title, position, and tenure at Western.
I'm Kim Winter. I'm the Dean of the College of Education and Allied Professions here. I'm also a full professor, and I serve in what's most like the superintendent-like role over the Catamount School. So that's an additional thing that we run out of the college. I've actually been at Western for 14 years already, which is hard to believe. I could not agree with Melissa more. I have been at three, this is my third institution, started at Comp Regional, went to an R1, then came to Western. It's the best place I've ever worked, truly supportive. And, I just say from the dean perspective, something we bring with us always is that being faculty. So I do consider myself a faculty member and I try to stay active. And since being a full-time administrator, I've published 2 books, written grants in excess of 3.7 million. So I try to be that good example for my folks by continuing to work as a faculty member as much as I can when I'm not covered up with the administrative kinds of things. So I also appreciate being here today. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Kim. Last but certainly not least, Siham.
Hi everyone, I'm Siham Lekshuri. I'm an associate professor and I'm program director for the online Masters in Human Resources in the College of Education and Allied Professions. I'm actually finishing up my 10th year at Western. I came straight from getting my PhD and started my first job here, tenure track, and I stayed here. And so this is all, been a great place to work. Um, I've had great mentors, and I'm sure we're going to get into that discussion later and how that, contributes to a person's performance and success. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, let's dive in. As I said, our first aim, the first half of our conversation today, I want to explore the groundwork, right? Where legacy actually begins and how we form those visions, how we clarify ourselves and start to think about alignment with our organizational initiatives. Wow, that's a mouthful. So I want to punt it out there to our panelists right now. How do you define legacy? Let's start there. I think it's a really important place to begin because I don't know if we share a common understanding of this definition. And more specifically, what does it actually look like, especially at the ground level? So, Kim, I'm going to punt it to you. You and I had a really great conversation around this definition and what it looks like to you. Would you like to kick it off?
Sure, I'm happy to. Legacy can be complicated to define, for sure. For me, I think it's thinking about what you leave behind. And don't get me wrong, we are all replaceable in our job. Somebody else will come along, take over, and be able to do well in whatever position we hold. But I think you have to think about it from two perspectives. One is your unit or your division. So when you're in any kind of leadership role, you have to think about what is the mission driving the work, what is your vision. And people will ask you for that a lot. You'll hear that in 360s, because it's easy to get bogged down in the work, but thinking about that vision. So what's important for you? So for me in the role now, it's thinking about for our college, what is that legacy I want to make sure is left behind? So for us, it was focusing in on development work over the last decade. We've tripled scholarship dollars. We've quadrupled our endowments, things that will help student success, which I think is a huge legacy piece that I want to make sure is left behind for students. So their success and the success of our team. But it's also thinking about your own personal legacy. So when you think about your own career, what is it that's important to you? One of the things that's been most important to me is as a female is helping female progression. So building a bench, female leaders, in higher ed. And that's also from an academic faculty standpoint. When I went up for full professor, I had one other person in the School of Teaching and Learning. That's a faculty of 43 who was a full professor who was female. And so, it was really important to begin to have conversations with people around, are you interested in moving from associate to full? What would that look like? What do we need to do to support you to get there? So that was a legacy for me, is helping females get whatever it is that they needed from a mentorship perspective to be able to get to the next place in their career. And sometimes that's sad for us because it means they're moving beyond our unit or division and doing something else, but that also has to be okay. For me, I think the definition is a combination of both thinking about your work and what you do and what's important vision wise for that in terms of legacy, and then what's important to you as a personal individual.
Thank you. And I think what's so important is in that first part, right? Like being able to identify that vision for you is goal making, right? You have to be able to set down what those goals are. And that can be both on the personal side and the professional side. So I'm really, again, just attaching to that as a takeaway. For some of us, when we think about making that leap to legacy, this big thing at the end, we forget that we have to take those very first baby steps and set those goals.
Yes,
Melissa,
Lou, I know one of the
yeah,
things
sorry.
that I said to you, I'm so sorry. Um,
Right.
I think it's important to say to the group, not one thing happened in the order I thought it was going to, at the pace I thought it was going to. I revisited my goals so many times, and of course, we're still doing that now. And so I just think it's important to recognize that nothing was how I originally planned it out.
I love that. There is no straight line between point A and point B. Melissa Seaham, any thoughts on the definition of legacy and what it looks like to you?
Yeah, I think I'll weigh in. I think Kim did a great job of sort of talking about sort of that bifurcated perspective on legacy, personal and organizational. One of the things I think about a lot is building institutional and leadership resiliency in terms of what comes next, right? I think Kim hit an important point in that, we're all replaceable. I mean, folks, if you think you're indispensable, think again, because anybody can come in. And one of my goals has always been to help develop the folks who are going to work us out of our jobs eventually. And that is something that's really important to me. And legacy is not something, it feels like, oh my gosh, it's such a grandiose term that I think in particular for women, we have a hard time thinking about that in terms of some large perspective. I'm going to leave a legacy. It sounds very intimidating. And can seem sort of self-serving, but I think if we pare it down to this idea that are we making things better for the folks that we serve for our institution, and are we making things better for the people that come after us? A question whenever I'm presented with a decision I have to make, I ask myself a couple of questions. First question is this good for our students? Number one, first and foremost, is this good for our students? Is this good for our campus community? And then more importantly, I think in some ways, I ask, is my successor going to thank me or cuss me for this decision? And if the response is they're going to thank me for this decision, then you kind of know you're on the right track. And if it's the other option, maybe we need to give it another think before we rush headlong into something. But making things better. I'm a first generation college student. I come from a very modest rural background. So the fact that I can come in to an institution and make a difference and make it better for our students, make it better for our campus, faculty and staff, then I feel like I can go home and feel really good about the work that I've contributed to a mission for an institution that I think is really worthy. And so from that perspective, if you just aspire to just do the best for the people that you serve, I think your legacy sort of forms itself.
And I think that that's so powerful because again, just like that incremental step of goal making that Kim was talking about, to you saying, okay, let's get out of this unattainable thought of legacy and bring it down into something that is tangible that we can hold on to, that we can, in a sense, control, right? At a very, scaled level.
Control is an illusion, Clue. You're
Right,
not in
right.
control. Just like
And I
Kim was saying, you're not, you don't get from point A to point B it's more of a
a
roundabout
squiggly
way.
line, absolutely. But when you feel that you have both that grounding and you don't look at the gulf between legacy and what your daily activities are, I think it becomes much more approachable for especially women in leadership, women in potentially male-dominated industries. That it helps us with our decision-making overload. We live in a world of extreme choices and variation right now. So I want to shift a little bit and see how I'd love to get your thoughts on this next question. I want to talk a little bit about how you approach making early decisions, whether from your own experience or from what you have gathered in research. I'm really interested, and you and I have talked about this in the past, about this myth of the work-life balance, right? So if we are in a position where we're making early decisions, we're taking on individual action steps and setting goals, What does the research bear out in this space, and what's your personal experience with early decision making?
That's a great question, Clue. Thank you. Honestly, in my work on work-life balance, one thing became very clear. Um, I feel like the word balance is actually a deceiving term. It's rarely a perfect equilibrium. It's never a balance. It's more of a juggling act. When you're trying to prevent personal and work life from conflicting. And so, in my research on this topic specifically, I found that a lot of women have, decide to leave their roles and maybe become entrepreneurs. They create their own work-life balance because it was impossible to find that balance or avoid those personal and professional conflicts from happening. And so that insight shapes how I have shaped, I've approached early decisions. And so clarity is never going to come. Like Kim said, it never goes according to plan. And so instead, I anchor my decisions in what matters most at the moment. There's values and priorities, and of course, my capacity. And so there's always a lot of uncertainty being part of that whole process. It shouldn't be a barrier. And so, in my research on this topic, particularly as it impacts women, many of them made impactful career decisions without knowing the outcome. For example, I had a great conversations with a good group of females who didn't know what it was going to look like to jump into entrepreneurship, becoming their own bosses, to create that own work-life balance or equilibrium from themselves. So those decisions created new paths, not just for them, but also for others, right? And especially as they mentored others into that process, they reached their success. It wasn't an easy path. They have a lot of challenges. And of course, there's no way to predict the future, but you have to position yourself intentionally within that uncertainty. And so, while managing also the realities of life as it actually is, it is dynamic, it is demanding, and it's constantly in motion.
I love that intentionalities, positioning yourself intentionally, even when the outcome may be uncertain or unclear.
Right.
I think that that is such a valid perspective to carry with you into these decision-making spaces. I also really appreciate your comments about capacity, right? Right. If we're going to break down this myth of work-life balance and we're really going to talk about, okay, it's how we're juggling and how we're finding ourselves on this equilibrium, capacity becomes a big thing. And so I want to bounce to Kim just really fast because in our conversations in this space, Kim, you have talked about how you have been strategic in decision making by building teams and consensus. So, can you talk to this group a little bit about what you have experienced in that space to be able to expand your capacity from a leadership perspective?
Sure. I think this gets at some of the later questions too about what are the daily actions you take that will hopefully benefit something larger. So when I became dean, one of the things that I found, well, first I will say there were a lot of what we like to refer to as handshake deals. Somebody talked to somebody and got them to agree for a situation to exist, or the other thing where lots of things lived in email only. There was no actual guiding document. So we spent a lot of um, time talking about guidance and processes and creating documents, which is, that's like regular daily tasks that seem like no real big thing, but they've made a huge impact on the work we do. So documents that talk about enrollment in classes and how we go about building that enrollment, how rules are different during the regular year versus the summer, how we make decisions about things, and at what point do we make a decision. Every bit of that lived in some amazing person's mind who had been here for a long time, or in some email somewhere. And people would literally pull up this email from years ago and say, well, here's this chart. And we didn't even have a copy of that chart somewhere else. It literally lived that way. So I think that that kind of investment, it made me create sort of vision and guidance documents for my department heads around collegial review. And here's my 9 expectations for the year and what I expect to happen. Then they in turn created documents to guide their own processes for their department. And now we have those things saved in our SharePoint sites and on the H drive and other places so that we can easily access them. Another is empowering your team. So we have an executive leadership, which would be me, our associate dean and department heads, and then a larger leadership council that includes all the major directors, assistant, associate department heads. It's a larger group of stakeholders. But really empowering those groups through whatever means. Sometimes it's a retreat that happens only once a year. Sometimes it's something monthly. So empowering them to bring groups together to talk about it. And I think a good example of this, and Lindley Hardy is on this call, so this is a shout out to her, is empowering your people to come up with good ideas that will help our workflows. So Lindley came up with something called learning liaisons, and she brings all of our staff together every month and brings in people like Allison, who's on the line, or somebody from travel, or they're going on a field trip next time. She was just telling me today to the library, and really getting people to talk about processes and why we do certain things and introduce them to dashboards. Sometimes an ASA role doesn't see the larger vision of what's going on behind an assessment dashboard. So introducing folks to those kinds of things, empowering them to bring their groups together and improve workflow. And so I think in turn that's helped us with turnover. It's helped our folks know each other better, be able to work together better, and feel supported at work. And I think that's not me. That's just simply me being one part of a larger process of encouraging your folks, giving them the ability and space to do that, make good ideas, help make it happen, if you will.
That gives me all the feels. And one of the things that I hear in that space is this we all bring to the table some implicit knowledge, something that is functioning, that we have as muscle memory, that you have done a brilliant job of bringing out and making explicit, right? What was once hidden is now revealed and now available to everybody to access and be a part of. And I try to encourage the same thing with my staff, right? Like, well, how do you do that? Write it down so that the next person will know and we can continue to build on that momentum and that success. I want to shift now and Kim, you've just given us a great segue on this, is those everyday leadership choices that scale. And so I'm gonna bounce to Melissa on this one. I want to know your perspectives on what the small everyday leadership practices are that you believe quietly compound into that long-term influence. And you and I have had conversations, and I've been in sessions where you have led leadership groups talking about the relationship component to that. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I, I, I think that the single most important thing that we can do, whatever role you occupy in an organization, is to invest in your relationships. Because at the end of the day, and Western is so uniquely relational as an institutional culture. I think this is especially true here, but I think it's true for any organization. If you think of building your capital like your piggy bank. I mean, you're not putting money into it, but you're building social and relational capital. That can help you. And I think that's especially true at Western. Those small everyday things, whether it's participating in committee work, whether it is meeting a colleague for coffee, whether it's doing a small task for a peer that they might need some help with. Investing in people is, I think, one of the most important things we can do for ourselves and do for our organization. And it often pays huge dividends down the line. I mean, we are in a people business. Universities are people business. We don't operate like a normal business, but It is essential, whether it's students, whether it's our faculty and staff. And for me, the external component, right? I know that um, I have to deal with legislators and elected officials a lot. If the first time I'm in their office asking for something is the first time that they're hearing from me, and that first conversation is an ask that I need something, I've already lost the game. I have to be able to trade on the relationships that we have, and building those incrementally over time is so hugely important. And one of the things I encounter in my role, and I think this is true for many folks, is we get hung up on this idea of what's my positional authority? What are the limits of my positional power, my positional authority? And then folks forget the vast reservoir of influential authority that they can wield, whether it's participating in some important work that moves the needle for the institution on a particular goal or priority. And those things come incrementally. They rarely occur with fireworks or big celebrations. It's the small work every day. I made some legislator feel good about Western. Somebody came here for an event and felt really, they liked the swag bag that we put together, or something that is small that touches people's lives or makes them feel seen and recognized. Those are the small everyday things that I think leaders should invest in and never overlook.
That's a really, really great thought. Uh, People matter, right? It's at the center. So I want to shift this a little bit into a mentorship topic. So, Siham, I think this is very applicable to what Melissa was just saying, the power of mentorship. What has been your experience with it? And I think it's interesting because your research has maybe also indicated that that has been maybe a barrier to women as well. So can you expand on that?
That is correct. So the most powerful thing that for me is mentoring, especially when it's intentional and it's everyday mentoring. In male-dominated fields where female role models are very, very limited, small actions matter more than we think. It can be as simple as making time to listen or offering honest feedback and saying you belong here when you're actually questioning your place as a female. I've heard that so many times from other females in higher leadership positions, but mostly in male dominated fields such as construction or fire service. And so these small actions can seem very small and little, but they have a significant impact because especially even more so if they come from other female leaders who have gone through that same path. One of the things that I heard, and that was constantly, I've heard it many times from other participants, was not only is there a lack of female role models in those fields, but other role models or other females who they thought were role models weren't mentoring them. And so they became a barrier to those other females versus supporting them. And so the idea was, well, I've gone through this path, I've gone through these challenges, it made me tough, and I got to do the same thing. I got to let them do it the same way. I honestly believe that mentoring has to really change and shift. We create this space, and it is so powerful that it will transfer across generation. We're not just shifting or making a small change. We're actually making a significant impact. We're building a culture where mentoring becomes natural for us. We support one another, and that's gonna translate for future generations. So that's how I see it personally.
Well,
Well,
can I jump in here before you comment on that? I love what Siham is saying so much about the mentoring. I would also just add, don't discount as a woman leader, don't discount the power of mentorship, even from male leaders as well. I think you can find mentorship in many, many forms, and don't discount that or put it aside because it's not from the person that you expected it to come from. It can come from surprising places. Accept that as a gift and move on, because there are lots of folks out there that are willing and able to mentor you, and sometimes you don't even realize it's happening.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. I've heard that so many times, especially from women in fire or in construction. It was such a surprising moment for them to realize that mentorship came actually from other folks they didn't even expect. And it was more meaningful when it came from another male leader that supported them throughout their journey. It didn't come without challenges, but they were there to help them get through it.
And I'm going to ping Kim in a subsequent question in our conversation today about the power of allyship. And I think that is the thread that you and Melissa are weaving together, or the threads that y'all are weaving together here. I do want to make just a quick comment before we transition into the next question, that these small actions where people are at the center. I think a core component of that is the cultivation of trust, right? From, being able to liaison with or liaise with a state legislator and make them feel good. That creates a sense of trust, from the point of mentor to mentee, right? There is trust at the center of that. And I think that is one thing that we have to pay attention to in terms of daily scalable actions. If we can be a person of trust and to see the potential and build trust with others, then we can make and set in motion those goals. And I'm really big on that, just FYI, with a 6-year-old right now, trying to teach her about this idea of trust. And if you have a chance, Google trust marbles, like how we invest in other people and recognize that other people are worthy of our trust. I think that is a really important theme in all of these daily scalable actions. Um, so I want to shift gears a little bit more into those intentional daily actions. And so, Melissa, I'm going to talk with you. I think you bring this 20 years of experience here. I think you have had 13 years at the senior executive cabinet level. Talk to us a little bit about your gut check practice.
Oh, wow. So this is where you can lean into your relationships and your team. And, Kim did a beautiful job of describing her intentional process of creating a good team. And gut checking is, I mentioned the two or three questions that I always ask myself when I'm confronted with a major decision. Is it good for our students? Is it good for our campus community? Will my successor appreciate this decision? Those are sort of gut checks for me, always to be intentional about that. But surround yourself, not make sure that you're putting your team together and supporting and mentoring them, but also make sure that your team, people that you're dealing with, are empowered to push back on you. One of the things that I really will send me into orbit is just people just agreeing to get along. And I tell folks on my team, please don't do that. Don't blow sunshine at me when it's not needed. I need your candidness and your transparency is what's going to help us all. So no one benefits when we're glossing over things. So now, that doesn't mean you can't be truthful, you can't be direct, but also be kind. I mean, that is helpful to do that. But when you are sitting around a table and you've got the priorities of the institution in your hand and moving it forward and knowing that decisions that you're making are going to impact so many people, keeping your values of your institution first and foremost, and then, making sure that your personal values align with that too. And it's okay if you find yourself in a situation where your personal values and your institutional values are now in misalignment, then it's okay to recognize that and transition out. Nobody's at fault there. I mean, I'll give you a very real instance at my last institution. And I worked for a great university before coming. This Western's my fourth university, and I worked for a great institution before I came here. And they were very well resourced, very great quality institution. But I found myself in a meeting where we were going into a new fundraising campaign, and the leadership of the campus gave this elaborate explanation for why we needed to have this new campaign starting. And I'm sitting there as a first generation student, and never once did the leadership mention the word student and student benefit at all. And I thought, okay, this is great. I now know what the institutional priorities are and the institutional values. They're not bad, but they don't reflect mine. And so it's time to make a change. And so I think as you move into leadership positions, be intentional and be cognizant of the fact that you're going to be put into instances that challenge your institutional values, that challenge your personal values, and challenge the alignment of those things. And be aware that if things are in great alignment, then you can move things forward and feel good about that. But don't beat yourself up. Show a little grace and kindness to yourself, that if you find yourself out of step and out of alignment, make a change that's going to be best for everyone involved. And surround yourself with people that will tell you when you are misstepping. That is the kindest thing you can do for other people.
I think that that is a really important point too. You always want to have somebody there to give you that honest feedback.
That's right.
I'm going to shift very quickly to Kim before we move and transition this into our second aim today. But Kim, I've had the privilege of working with you in the grant making space, right? Over 3 million in grants awarded. And one of the things that I know about you is that you are a pragmatist. So, in terms of your intentional daily actions, can you talk a little bit about your approach in that space? I think in conversations past, you spoke about quietly and consistently building expectations. Talk to us a little bit about how that rubber meets the road.
Yeah, that's great. I think a big part of it is about communication and advocacy. And I often, when I talk about communication with folks, I often call it relentless communication. And advocacy is kind of the same because it's never ending, right? So whether it's your newsletters that you send, we send ours on first Friday, whether it's the when you're meeting with your team and giving those things, the emails that you send, it also has to be very intentional. So you're not trying to bombard people, but it's this constant. And even going back to what you said a few minutes ago about trust, I think is such an important point. I say to my leaders in the college, if everyone in your unit is happy with you all of the time, you're probably not doing your job really well. Someone will not be happy if you're making strong decisions and doing those gut checks that Melissa was talking about. And so I actually think our benchmarking on the 360 evaluation shouldn't be 100%, right? Because I think you have to make those hard decisions. And that was one of the questions here about how do you make decisions that are based on values with courage? And I think there are lots of good examples of that. A couple of those in my college would be reallocations. I've had to reallocate a line from one department to another. So not even within a department, it's that department losing it all together to another area in support of student success, in support of a program that needed additional resources to do that, and one that wasn't growing or had sufficient resources. You do have to build up your courage to do that because people will. It's everyone's right and honestly our responsibility to care about our discipline and our area. And so sometimes you have to do those things that take that extra courage that are the right thing to do. And someone might, as Melissa said earlier, they might cuss me initially, but at the end of the day, if my people trust me, I don't have a personal need for everyone to agree with all the decisions that I make. I know that they're not going to, but by and large, I feel that my college overall trusts me to constantly be advocating for them and to make decisions that I think are in the best interest of our college in terms of our vision and mission and how that fits into the university mission. I think another example of that was when we had to move Catamount School. So we were, in essence, kicked out of our space. We weren't kicked out of being partners with our partner, but we were told that we would need to move that space. And so, I had to go into huge advocacy mode, right? To talk to the chancellor and the provost to say, can I ask this question? Do we have space here? Is this a possibility on our campus? And, I'm sure there are a few people, but my experience is that most people don't really like to talk to the media all the time. So the media coming at me was constant. And I could have just been honest and said some very frank things about what was going on. But I wanted what I said to the outside world to be aligned with my own personal missions and visions and the values of this institution, which was to take the very high road. And that's what we did. And I think in the long term, that left a greater legacy for Catamount School and this institution. And you can see the success of that. That was really painful for a very long time, at least a year. There were a lot of pain points around that. It was not an easy thing to do, but we had to have the courage to ask the questions about whether or not it could happen and then make it happen. And that meant, and I'm sure Chancellor Brown knows this very well, that made people on our campus uncomfortable because people here had to move and step aside to make room. And so sometimes you're making those tough decisions that you hope you can see some greater good down the road from, and you're basing that in value. So I hope those are a couple of examples that get at some of that.
Those are great examples, and I think that between you and Melissa, y'all have really captured how you can lead through moments of uncertainty with courage that have outcomes that continue to keep the vision and the focus of our institutional values aligned. So I'm going to shift our conversation into the second aim. I do want to be able to leave some time for our audience if they have any questions that they would like to ask the panelists. So our second aim today is exploring the transition from personal leadership intent to broader organizational impact. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, I think that this is probably the point at which we start to see the solidification of legacy, right? That's how it comes into focus for us down the road. So I want to start here with Siham, and I want to ask the question, and this your research I think complements this question. What do you think are the greatest barriers to women in the workforce? And I know that you and I have had conversations about the glass ceiling and the backlash theory in particular. So can you speak to that a little bit?
I'll probably need more than an hour to speak about
No.
that. Um, there's just so many. And honestly, based on my research, the barriers that women face are not just structural barriers. They're deeply cultural and subtle. And so we still see those strong expectations around how women should behave and lead. And this is where the backlash theory becomes very relevant. So in my work, I've observed that when women display assertiveness or leadership traits typically associated with success, you know, if we're looking at men, they can face negative reactions. And so that's where the backlash theory comes in. So they're considered as either being too aggressive or unlikable. And so I feel like they're often navigating this double bind. And so at the same time, the idea of work-life balance, as I mentioned earlier, is also, misleading. It's always that juggling act with women being held high, sometimes with those conflicting expectations across both domains. And so another barrier that I've seen and that we've talked about is the lack of mentorship, even more so in male-dominated fields. There is limited access to guidance. There is limited resources. For example, in the fire departments, They didn't know that women have a different body, a different fit. Their PPE, their personal protective equipment that is usually designed for men does not fit women. And it creates a hazard for women. It makes their job more dangerous because if it doesn't fit, it doesn't properly protect them. That was just one example. The gloves, for example, there were several actually women who had to buy their own boots because the ones they were given just didn't fit. They were not the right fit. The pants, I mean, it goes on and on. And so every field has its own type of challenges and barriers. But generally, with the proper mentorship, for example, in fire departments, when other female chiefs have been through that path before, they paved the way for other women to actually have those resources they struggled so much to have.
Mhm.
And so the challenge is not just access, but it's also navigating those expectations and perceptions and understanding them beforehand, especially the invisible ones,
Mhm. Mhm. And
and making sure,
yeah,
right.
sorry, I interrupted.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And I think that you talked too about the mental capacity that
Yes.
we have to invest in being able to navigate that, especially within the backlash theory. And I want to very quickly bounce to Kim and you have had those experiences that Siham has described about the mental capacity that you have to think critically about your words, your actions, and how those will be interpreted by those around you. Um, right? That you, like Sam, you said that like, how we can be interpreted as being aggressive. Would in similar circumstances that say men would never be, characterized as that. So Kim, can you take a little bit of what Siham has described from the research level and what your experiences have been with it?
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to recognize, even though there are many women in higher education in every kind of position, and we're fortunate at our institution to have many women leaders to look up to. I feel so fortunate for that. We still exist in a world where there are gender stereotypes all around us. We still sometimes sit in meetings where we will be we could say the very same thing that a male counterpart says, and it is reacted to differently, or sometimes just not really acknowledged. And then later in the conversation, someone says the same thing and it becomes their idea. For me personally, I've had to just continue to stay true to who I am, right? And part of that is thinking about your own values. With some of the earlier questions, if anyone ever asks me, what's the best thing you've ever done or what's most important to you? I always say being a mother first. Always, every time. It never occurs to me to first give an answer about work. And I've never once heard a man say that, right? It doesn't mean that there aren't men out here who wouldn't say that. But I think I have to recognize this is part of who I am as a person and what I bring to the table. I have to be willing to be okay with what people say about me and move forward and still fight for the things that I believe in, even if someone says I was being aggressive in doing so. But part of that is what we talked about related to mentors. And I have been fortunate to have some really great male mentors in my career as well. And I think at this point in my career, I look for those allies. And the example that I gave to Clue in our conversation was that Provost Starnes has been a most excellent boss to me. And I think part of it is that we were colleagues as deans first, right? So we already had a relationship and that helps. Sometimes that can make it complicated when someone becomes your supervisor, but I consistently see him being an ally to females in our meetings. I consistently see him reiterating things that females say. On the rare occasion when something I said was overlooked, someone later says it, or someone else in provost council or somewhere like that, he always comes back around and says, well, that was a lot like what Jill was saying a few minutes ago when we talked about such and such. And so I think it's important to see those allies in our world, to let them know. And I've said that to him on many occasions, how I appreciate that support. And that goes back to even what we were talking about before related to trust. And so because we've had those frank conversations, I have a great trust in him. He has a great trust in me. And I think that makes me feel empowered in my position. If you talk about positional authority, I often feel that because of those examples and those conversations that we've had around that. So, anyway.
Yeah, no, and I think you just tied it right back around to Melissa with the idea that that positional authority, while there may be that with a title, it really comes down to the relationships, and it really comes down to who you can trust and who you have in your corner to be that ally, to help you not look at having to stand up to all of that misconception alone. Um,
Clue, can I weigh in on that too?
Yes.
I
Tie us off.
well, I mean, I underscore everything that Siham and Kim said. I mean, we live in a gendered world. It is a reality that we have to deal with. I think I try to operate from a very practical perspective and use a process, and it's not anything I came up with. But many other women have used this too. Process of amplification. We can do a great job for each other if we engage in amplification. And that is like I mean, this is simple, right? If you're in a meeting, and to Kim's point, right, we've all dealt with things where you say something, but when a man says it, it becomes his idea. But we can help each other as women. If you find yourself in a meeting, the chancellor does this, and I so appreciate it so often because I find myself now, the chancellor, of course, operates at a level of rare air, but around the senior cabinet level, I'm the only female senior executive other than the chancellor now, and that puts me in a position where I'm having to deal with men in decision making capacity a lot. But one of the things she does for me, and I try to do for other people, is if you do say something, amplify it. I'm in a meeting, Clue, you say something great, and somebody starts talking about something else, bring it right back around and say, that sounds like the idea that Clue said a minute ago. I think that's awesome. And you can do it in a positive way and underscore it and amplify each other. Amplification is something I try to do often and frequently.
Oh, I love that. I really do. I love the word too. And Sam, I think that you can tie us off here and we'll open it up to questions from the group, about your thoughts related to, replacing the idea of becoming one, right? The first woman to fill in the blank with becoming one of many. Talk to us a little bit about that, and then I'll open it up to Q&A.
Thank you, Clue. And we had that conversation and we watched that video that I shared with you. And there was this great Mercedes ad that was published a couple of years ago, and it just stuck with me. It shows a young girl saying, I don't want to be the one. I want to be one of many. And it was just such a strong and powerful sentence for me. Women don't want to be one who has, with a legacy. The idea is to open it up for as many women as possible, making it accessible, creating a path, an equal path for women, because we've talked about, briefly about the glass ceiling and the challenges that women face to advance and reach leadership positions, which can be even more complicated and longer in male-dominated fields. And so being one of many, and that sentence for me just it really stayed with me. I don't want to be one or the only one. I want to be one of many. When that group becomes larger and larger, it translates into larger influence
Mhm.
and shift in cultures and shift in mindsets and more acceptance of that. And so for me, that ad will just stick with me for probably the rest of my life because it was just such a powerful ad. And I highly encourage you all to watch it. It does really share such a powerful message.
It was a Mercedes commercial from a couple of years ago. We'll try to find the link and post it on the website. But I think what you're also talking about is the power of that amplification, right?
Mhm.
So we've got, about what, 6 minutes, y'all. The conversation has been so great. Let me open it up here. Do we have any questions? Feel free to unmute to ask them. April Talent, who is our executive board member from NCACE and our director of culture faculty commons, she'll help me moderate the chat if you want to pop a question into chat. But we have a few minutes and would love to hear from the crowd. Hey,
I have a
Mary.
question. Kim, I really appreciated what you said about managing the likability issue, right? Knowing that, your team is not always going to agree with your decisions, but they need to be able to trust that you're going to communicate, on their behalf, you're going to advocate for them. I feel like I am very much a pragmatist, and I understand that logically and academically, but I do think it is challenging. To experience that kind of in real time or the aftermath of a decision you've made that is not popular. Can you just talk a little bit about how you've managed that in your career?
Yeah, that's great. So I think for faculty, the example I always give, it's a little bit like when you get course evals, right? So, when I get that big feedback, so the 360 kind of feedback, I allow myself to read all of it, right? The objective and the subjective, and I give myself this little bit of you get your pity party for whatever, I set myself a limit. And it may be one comment and there could have been 20 that were excellent, but it doesn't matter if it was something, particularly for me, if I've set a goal for something that I was working on, and then you see a comment where someone didn't feel that it was resolved, right? Or things weren't going in the way you wanted it to. It's hard. And so I think part of it is you have to allow yourself your little time. And I just call it my little pity party. So I give myself some time to reflect on it. But then you really have to be, and I know some of this is generational. It's the Gen X in me. And so, I can hear my mother. I just have to pull myself up, my bootstraps, whatever you want to say. So I allow myself time to think and reflect on it, but also be real with myself. If you have to move on, and, part of being very pragmatic is there are constantly day-to-day tasks that you have to get into, and, you can be swallowed up by that work as well. So it's a both and. You get to think about it, reflect on it. You can figure out how that can help you set new goals where you might go from there to help you continue to work on something. I think for many of us in our leadership positions, some of the goals that we set, you always end up, your answer at the end of the year is ongoing. Many of those goals are not things that are check and it's like crossed off the list. That doesn't exist for a lot of things. So part of it is really teaching yourself over time to know some things are ongoing and you make incremental progress over time. So one of the things I like to do, however you want to do it, is underneath my goals, I'll have an A, B, C, D or tasks. Like what are the things that need to be accomplished to help me get toward this goal? And that does help you feel accomplishment toward it, even though it may continue on as a goal in the future.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Other questions?
I have a question. Kind of for Melissa, but you talked a lot about building relationships and this campus being very relational, and I really value that because that's how I see myself, and I feel like I tried to spread that message to other administrative support professionals across campus, networking, building your team, making those connections, and the social capital that you gain when you make those connections. Do you feel like that is more of like something women do? Or have you seen men in leadership positions that also really value that relationship building as much as you do?
Oh, I see men valuing that a lot. In fact, in some ways, they have sort of traditional ways that feed that, right? I see male colleagues, right? They'll go and it hasn't been that long. I mean, I know I've been at Western a long time, but I remember getting here and there still used to be a Friday night poker club that was all men that went. I mean, so or I see male colleagues going out on a Friday afternoon and they go and play golf, and those things still happen. And so, in some ways, the avenues for that it's almost a little bit easier in some ways for men because there are sort of these traditional avenues to create that relationship building. But I know for my peers, I think about the folks I work with most closely on executive council, the provost, the CFO, the other vice chancellors. Building relationships, I know sounds really like a kind of a small thing to do, but it's a lot of work. You have to be willing to invest the time. I mean, and making time for that. And I see many of my male colleagues doing that frequently and being intentional about it. And we all do it a little bit differently, right? The CFO, Mike Byers, he and I always do a monthly lunch meeting at a minimum. We do that. But yet if I need the provost or he needs me, we're back and forth in each other's offices every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And those little touch points can just reiterate that. But just go into relationship building knowing that it's not the easiest thing that you're going to be doing. In some ways, it's the hardest thing. You have to invest the time and making space and time to um, not just initially build those relationships, but keeping them going can be just as hard of work. That's a great question, though, Holly. I thank you for that. I didn't mean it in a gendered way. It is just as meaningful for women as it is for men.
But I think you underscore the investment, right? It on the surface can seem very easy,
Yeah.
but relationships are reciprocal and they take cultivation, and that
Yes,
takes
they
time.
do.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
I also think you kind of pointed out something, Melissa, that it might be more challenging for women in those male-dominated spaces to build those relationships because some of those traditional routes aren't necessarily there.
Right.
If you didn't grow up golfing, you might not be out on the course with them, or maybe you just had a child and you're breastfeeding, you're not going to go grab a beer, or those types of things that they traditionally do. So just, I guess, something to keep in
Yeah.
mind.
And just recognizing that just because the relationship building might look different or take different forms, especially when you're crossing sort of gender boundaries a little bit, I think it's probably easier for my male colleagues to go with each other after work and have a beer, or go play golf or something like that. But if I and a male colleague did that, it would be viewed with a very different lens, right? So, but being okay with that and just finding paths that work best, but never losing sight of the fact that putting that work in can pay huge dividends.
It looks like we got,
Deidre, get out of here with your pickleball.
when are we going to meet on the court, Deidre? I got my paddle. Well, I want to be respectful of the time. It is 1:02, and this was an hour-long program. I'll just leave it out there. Is there any last or lingering question that we can ask our panelists now?
It's not a question, it's just a comment. I
Absolutely.
really enjoyed the amplification. Um, I think that we just need to hear that as a form of affirmation because no one likes to be heated, as we said. So that was a great takeaway, and thank you all for sharing today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. I agree with you. Well,
Huge thank you to Clue for organizing this. Thank you, Clue.
So much
you're
work
more than
behind the
welcome.
scenes. Thank you.
Yes, this was an hour well spent.
I am so thrilled to hear that. I'm humbled. We are going to again be able to share this recording out, so look for it in the future. And if I can support you in any way, please let us know. I really appreciate your time today. And to our panelists, again, thank you very much.
So I can share with the other people
Thank
on
you.
the School of Nursing that may not have been involved with this. How will it be shared?
We will share this out through our affiliate site, Sheila. So that site is go.wcu.edu/NCACE. I'm going to put it in the chat right now for you to grab.
Thank you.
You are so welcome. And we send out our monthly newsletter usually mid-month. And with that, we hyperlink our website, and the newsletter is also available on our website. So be on the lookout. I've got you on my list.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
Thanks, y'all. Be well.
Thank you.